simple core with flexible pricing. That would be my advice.
Coffee's for closers only.
So we've established my proposal is sound in principle, now we're just haggling over price.
Let's see how much we're going for on eBay.
Man, it's the same as Dunkin' Donuts, costs 15 times the price.
Welcome to Impact Pricing, the podcast where we discuss pricing, value, and the transformational relationship between them. I'm Mark Stiving. Today our guest is AmyKonary. Here are 3 things you want to know about Amy before we start. She's the Global VP of Zora's Subscribed Strategy Group. She's founder and chair of the Subscribed Institute, and she coaches youth soccer. I barely know the rules to soccer. Welcome, Amy.
Thanks so much. Nice to be here, Mark.
Oh, it's going to be fun today, I think.
I think so.
Today, by the way, I think you're the second person I ever had twice on the podcast. So it's a huge honor.
Thank you very much for this honor.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about a paper that you and Carl Gold, who was also on the podcast once before, put together. It was called B2B Subscription Pricing, 3 Critical Elements That Impact Revenue Growth. And I love the paper. I love anytime people put out data and say, here's what's going on, but had a bunch of questions. So do you mind if we ask a bunch of questions?
Sure, absolutely.
So first off, tell us, what was the methodology? How did you guys, what data did you use? Who did the analysis? How did you do that?
Yeah, sure. So Carl Gold, who you mentioned you've had on the show before, he's Zora's chief scientist. And Carl is the owner of the methodology here. So I am not as much the methodologist, but I'll give you my 50,000-foot view. We are able, Zora is a software as a service company that runs roughly 1,000 companies on our platform. And we are able to, because we're a SaaS company, look at an anonymous and aggregate basis at the way that our customers are running their businesses and the growth percentage and retention percentage results of different ways that they might set up their business. So what we're able to find and show, a lot of that has to depend on what Zora's software enables. So one of the things that we do enable is flexible pricing and packaging. We enable our customers to change pricing models to offer things like value pricing and usage pricing. And then through this methodology, we're able to look at the impact of those types of approaches for our customers on their businesses.
Excellent. And so you guys had broken this up into 3 key chunks. And just as a quick overview, it was flexible pricing, flat fee instead of per unit pricing, and usage-based pricing. And I want to go through those one at a time if we can. Mm-hmm. First off, I don't really understand what flexible pricing meant when you did this. Do you have any idea or how you measured that or what that looked like?
Yeah, so the way that we think of it is in terms of having agility. So for us, what we find is what's different about the subscription world versus the product world. If you're in the product world, you get flexibility by adding more SKUs or SKUs. So I've got a product, I want to sell it in the green, there's a green SKU. I want to sell the product for a period of time. Well, I create a SKU for that period of time, another SKU for that period of time. So the way that you add flexibility is to just increase the size of the product catalog. What we find in the subscription world is the way that you add flexibility is by coupling a simple and a flexible approach. And what we mean by that is rather than selling products, you're selling services around specific subscribers. So with our, within the Zora system, so the atomic unit, rather than being a SKU, is a subscriber. And that subscriber can subscribe to your services in multiple ways. So when we think of flexibility, we think of the different ways that you can enable a subscriber to either purchase or use the service, consume the service that you offer. So that's sort of a broad definition, but I think it really gets at the heart of what's different about subscription services and why it might be so challenging for companies that offer subscription services to offer this kind of agility, and then therefore why those companies that do tend to see growth impacts. And that's really what this study's about.
Can you give us an example, pull a company that we all know?
Sure. One of our companies that we use a lot as an example is a company called Box. In your work life, you might come across Box. They're a storage management software. So you've got a lot of presentations that you want to put into place and have lots of people in your company be able to come and collaborate and use it. You might use Box and put the presentations there, and everyone can kind of collaborate and consume them there. When Box launched their service on Zora as a subscription service, they were just really taking a guess at what the value of this type of service would be to their subscribers. And they actually changed their pricing hundreds of times within the first year of launching that service to figure out what was right. And we will often say to the companies that we work with that when they launch their subscription service, the first prices that they come up with are probably going to be the wrong ones. And so for most of the companies that we work with, and probably for a lot of the subscription services we subscribe to, we don't see all of that flexibility as consumers, because it's not as if my price changes every day, but the price that I would subscribe to, and for a year subscription might be a certain amount. 2 months from now, someone else might subscribe and it's new pricing. Or when I go to renew, the pricing might be new, or there might be new tiers or options available to me. So there's a lot of flexibility behind the scenes that these companies use to try to find the right pricing.
Nice. And so you as Zora get to see how often they change the price, which is really cool.
That's right.
Do you
That's
also
right.
get to see when they tweak the packages? So to use my language, I always think in terms of good, better, best. And what if I take a feature out of better and I put it into good? Do you see that tweaked as well?
Absolutely. And in fact, on this particular report that we're talking about here, the very first chart has to do with that, which is, we think of products and product versions the same way that you would mention packages there, just how we talk about it in our system. And what we find is that there's a couple of things. First of all, the fastest growing companies are those that introduce new packages or products more frequently. So we look at it in terms of like within the last year, they've introduced something new. We also find that the fastest growing companies are those that actually manage the product catalog. So while they'll introduce something new, they're actually looking at the long tail of products and packages, and they're either discontinuing those or they're not focusing on those anymore. So I think it's a combination both of, you said, coming up with a good, better, best approach, but then there's also the tweaking that over time. Adding, we've actually, not in this report, but we have a statistic that about 70% of your subscription revenue as a business selling subscriptions is going to come after that initial customer acquisition. So that means that pricing and packaging is really important. Your ability to cross-sell and upsell is really important. Your ability to increase volume is really important, because that's really where you're going to get the most of your revenue from that subscriber. And so that's one of the reasons why packaging is so important.
Yeah, awesome. We'll put a link to the study in the show notes, but I really want to ask, you're showing number of products per $1 million of revenue, and the fastest companies have less than one product per $1 million. When you define product, and let's use good, better, best for a second, is that one product or is that 3 products?
That would likely in our system be looked at as 3 different products. So product A is good, product B is better, product C is best, as an example. So what we find is that early on, and we also look at companies across the maturity curve. Early on, and we talk with companies like, keep it simple. Just launch something really simple when you get to market. As the company matures, as their revenue grows, that's where you start to see companies do segmentation, really get into the good, better, best models, maybe sell some add-ons. So a lot of that sophistication and some of the, frankly, the complexity that might come typically comes down the road when companies have more revenue. And the point that you mentioned too around the a smaller number of products per million, less than 1 per million. It ties into what I was saying earlier, in that the best companies manage that, right? They don't come out with, here's 20 different things that you can buy from us. It's very confusing for people to try to figure it out. They might come out with 20 things over time, or they might have 20 iterations of that initial product, of that good, better, best. But the idea is you have something simple. I've got a set of values that I want to offer out to the subscriber. I want to be your, I want to manage all of your documents for you, or I want to provide entertainment for you, or I want to help you, learn a new language, whatever that might be. Think about that as the package, and then the flexibility for how you do that, again, is the way you turn it into products, the way you evolve those products over time, and the way you price and package it over time.
I have to say that makes all the sense in the world, because if you think about a small company, you don't have the resources to market or position or communicate on 20 different products. Focusing on one would make a huge difference.
And it's so key to remove that friction from the sales process. And I oftentimes will use the analogy of the Cheesecake Factory menu. To be honest, I'm not sure if the Cheesecake Factory still exists. It's been a while since I've been out to dinner. But if you remember it, it's like a phone book, and I remember sitting down at the Cheesecake Factory trying to figure out what to order. And it was almost impossible. It'd take you so long. And in the subscription world, you want to eliminate that kind of friction. You want to make it really obvious to the customer what they should buy and what kind of value it's going to offer to them. So you're really, doing yourself a disservice if you've got too much choice for customers.
By the way, I think that's true in most worlds.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
So you've got flat fee versus per unit pricing as the second chunk. Let me just toss that softball to you and say, so what do you think, and how do you define those?
Yeah, so softball, this is a classic, so aligning price and value type of question here. And that aligning price and value, I think, is probably always important. But when it comes to subscriptions and subscription services, it's really important. You don't want to give people the perception that they're paying for things that they don't use. The one size fits all approach doesn't work well for subscription offerings. And so, what we find is that are most successful are those that recognize that not every subscriber is the same, and not every subscriber is going to get the same amount of value out of the service. So when you've got a flat fee for a service, it kind of assumes that everyone's going to consume it in the same way. Everyone's going to kind of get the same value. One of the nice things, I suppose, about flat fee is it's fairly simple to understand. And so we do see companies starting out with that. Maybe to just find what is the value, how are people going to use it. It's kind of a simple way to come out of the gate. But what we find is that as companies evolve their offerings, they start to see their subscriber base not as a monolith, but as cohorts and segments. And there's an opportunity there to use more flexible pricing to make sure that you're doing a better job of aligning price and value. And so we find that the best companies do just that.
Yeah, so let's try not to jump to usage-based pricing with this next question I'm going to ask you. But I often think that number of users, isn't the best pricing metric to capture. And so is it really usage that matters? Number of users that matter, the fact that we're doing a per unit price, or maybe per unit pricing means something different than per user in my mind.
It could be per user. It really depends on the service. So I think a lot of times, and I came from the software industry, and I suppose I work for a software company now. And so when I think of per unit, I'm oftentimes thinking about the unit meter that we're thinking about there is users, but it could also be, it could be a unit of consumption. It could be a unit of, training hours consumed. It could be, so it doesn't necessarily have to be a user or an individual. I think that's, or subscriber. There could be some notion of consumption associated with it. We also see, tiering of units that could take place here. So, we've got flat fee or per unit here, and there are ways of making per unit a little bit more predictable, because of course you're always trying to balance off. I mentioned how flat fee is, one of the nice things about it is it's pretty predictable. You know exactly what it's going to cost. Whereas in theory, the per unit pricing, especially for something that's new, you might not know exactly what you need to start. And so one of the things that the company can do to make it clearer for the subscriber, if it's a consumer, or for the business to know how many units they need, is to create some tiering or some other mechanism for you to right size your environment so that you don't have either too much or too little for what it is you're trying to achieve.
Okay, and so what's the difference then between per unit and usage based in your mind?
Yeah, so the way that I look at it is per unit is, it's a good way of scaling something, but it's independent of the use intensity. So if we use the user, analogy, which I think is a simple one for to wrap their heads around, and in the software world, if you're paying per user, that and it's sort of a monolithic user. Let's assume there's no like self-service, power user. It's just user. AmyKonary might be in that system all day long, and Mark, you might only check it every once in a while, or there's a great degree of the actual usage that happens. So the per user model is okay. Again, it's a way of per unit pricing, of getting at that value alignment. But it does not solve for the fact that some users might have a higher use intensity, I guess, than others. And so we see usage-based pricing being a really important approach, particularly in situations where it's really important what that usage might be to the value that you're getting out of the service. May not always want to go in the direction of usage. And we often see usage being the icing on the cake. In fact, that's when Carl Gold talks about usage pricing and the growth benefits that we see companies getting from usage pricing. He refers to it as it's truly the icing on the cake, and that you don't want to have too much usage pricing. If you go too far into that like super flexible per usage pricing, you can actually start to see your growth drop off. There's a sweet spot where it's not zero, but it's not over a certain percentage, where we can definitely see some growth returns. And I think that's representative of companies using it very strategically, either for, there's a lot of different scenarios where it can make sense.
It was interesting, and what jumped out of my mind is the graph that you guys put in the paper here says, if I'm not using any usage-based pricing, then I probably have about a 17% growth rate. If I use 1 to 25% of my revenues coming from usage-based, it's 25%, and more than 25% is coming, I'm getting 21% growth rate. So those are interesting. But what jumped out at me was the question is, what about the 25 to 50% range, right? How did you choose 25% as the cutoff between, we're going to look at everybody below 25 and everybody above 25?
The answer to that is there aren't that many companies that had over 25%. So when we looked at the cohorts of companies that were in the database using Zuora, the majority of them fell into one of these three buckets. And so from a statistical significant perspective, these are the cohorts that we could make draw the strongest conclusions. There just aren't that many companies. Everything, 50% would be in that greater than 25% bucket, right? But the sort of a relatively even split between those three.
Yeah. So
and you can actually see that in that pie chart, actually, by the way, of what that actual split looks like. So greater than 25% was only 18% of companies in the study. So it was a pretty small piece, whereas 47% when the study was done had no usage-based pricing at all. And 35% had that 1 to 25% range, and those are the ones, again, that saw the strongest growth.
Okay, so I don't want to put you on the spot here, but let's pretend that Box can exemplify all of these for me. And if you can, this would be great. If you need another company, that's fine. Using Box, what's the difference between per unit and usage-based pricing?
So using Box, the way that Box works is that I and many of my colleagues in different parts of my organization would have a license, or be a user, would be able to upload things into Box. And so there might be certain number of us within the organization. You have still in today's software world, it's talked about as a license for those 25 people. A usage paradigm might be, okay, Zuora, you have 2,500 documents in the box, and that is X amount of terabytes of storage, and we're on a monthly basis going to look at the number of storage that is being utilized. You can have an unlimited number of people uploading and downloading, but the way that your price is going to change, or the way we calculate your price, is based on, that actual storage usage. So that might be one usage model. Another usage model might be how many times do people upload and download things. And maybe that's the usage model. So me as a user, I could put 25 PowerPoints in the box a day and pull down 50 things. Someone else could do 1 and 2. And so that would be different amounts of usage. Now I can think of problems with both of those models if they're the only pricing metric, but those are the examples in that analogy that I could think of where Box could think about a usage-based approach.
Yeah, and so the idea then is I'm going to do usage. If I'm going to do less than 25% of my revenue on usage, I'm going to do usage on top of something else. So I may be charging per user plus some license for total usage or something like that.
That's right. And the reason that we know the difference for that in our system is, in part how, the customer sets up the different type of pricing model, but also our system will take in usage from other systems. So there are other systems that will actually do the metering and tracking of, how much storage is being utilized or how many, things were uploaded or downloaded. And then we have, our customer will set up actual rates associated with that usage. And then we do that rating. And then that's what's billed out. So from a systems perspective, that's the difference in how we know, is this usage versus is this, a per unit or a flat fee type of pricing.
Nice. Amy, I got to say that I've absolutely loved this conversation. I would love to have your job just so I could work with Carl and have him do all these analytics for me.
It's great. It's great. I have the best job.
No doubt. No doubt. But just for kicks, let me end with the final question. Do you have a piece of pricing advice you'd like to give our listeners that you think could have a big impact on their business?
Simple core with flexible pricing. That would be my advice.
Nice. And I might even take that to say test and tweak often while you're trying to figure this out.
That's also really important advice.
Yeah. Well, I think that goes with the flexible piece. So I'm just going to pretend like you said it. So, Amy, thanks so much for your time today. If anybody wants to contact you, how can they do that?
You can find me on LinkedIn, AmyKonary with a K, Konary. Perfect.
Episode 89, all done. Oh no, this was episode 90. I didn't change the number. Ooh. Please don't forget to leave us a review. We greatly appreciate it. Join our free community at community.championsofvalue.com. That's where you'll see all of the memes, blogs, videos, podcasts, everything I put out gets posted up there, or at least links to it too. And if you have any questions or comments about the podcast or about pricing in general, feel free to email me, mark@impactpricing.com. Now, go make an impact.